Welcome to the Miracle You, guiding you on the journey towards finding passion and purpose, and how to discover, create, and live a life by your design. Whether your success has been plentiful or your missed opportunities have been overwhelming, we can help you become a more empowered, masterful person and show you how to share your gift with the world. It's time to inspire change from within with the host of the Miracle You, Vince Kramer.
Hello, imagination. I'm Vince Kramer, your host, and welcome to the Miracle You, where you learn about the magic of living your life by finding the example in real life.
Most of us, if not all of us, have experienced some type of trauma in our life, and that trauma affects us in many ways. In fact, memories or thoughts come back and put us back into that traumatic state. And we use to protect ourselves from that traumatic state things that we've learned in the past to make us feel safe or comfortable, or things that we've developed in our past to help us feel safe or comfortable. And it's in that trauma that we tend to take care of ourselves in ways that are actually disempowering to us. So if we can learn to have compassion for ourselves, learn that the self-judgment that we have on the situation that caused the trauma and why we were possibly or probably responsible for it, and allow ourselves to move into a place of releasing the guilt, releasing the shame, and allowing ourselves to move beyond those patterns that we developed in the past, we can then start empowering ourselves to live life in a different way, to live the life that we're meant to live. Compassionate awareness helps you empower yourself and others. When you understand that looking at compassion from a place of, oh, poor you, you should be rewarded, or you should not have to worry about the experience, that's taking the power away from people. Or if you look at it from the other aspect, or you handle it from the other aspect of, look, you should be doing better than this. Look, pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and move on. You're disempowering people also. Compassion has to come from the middle ground. And that middle ground is, yes, there's something that happened that created this trauma in your life. But now, how do you look at that trauma from a way that you can move beyond it? You can stop self-judging. You can stop the internal self-talk and empower yourself to use that circumstance, that situation, to develop more gifts and talents in your life so you can make a bigger difference. I'm with Jon McLernon today. Jon is a weight loss coach and emotional eating expert who has lost 100 pounds. From nanotechnology researcher to Navy Marine engineer to globe-trotting nomad, he spent most of his life running from his true calling until one question changed his life. Now he's on a mission to help others lose weight for good and leave BS diets in the rearview mirror. With Freedom Nutrition Coaching, Jon marries the science of metabolism with the psychology of behavior change and the compassion of human connection to create life-changing transformations with his clients. Jon McLernon, are you ready to share the miracle of you with the imagination?
I absolutely am. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I love that you're already hosting a space for conversations like this. So,
well, thank you so much, and I'm glad to have you share a little bit about how we can keep our temples healthy so we can live the life that we're meant to live. Your bio was purposely short, so we had plenty of time to talk with you, but I would love for you to share a little bit more about yourself, Jon, and what you're doing in the world.
By all means, yeah. So I live up in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. So for American listeners, I'm just north of Montana, about 6 hours, and I just have the Rocky Mountains to the west of me. So it's a really beautiful, beautiful area of Canada. I currently run an online nutrition coaching business, as we touched on. My real area of interest here is what I call brain-driven weight loss. I think that it fascinates me what is the real like driver of behaviors. And I also love the idea of deep health. So looking at health from a broader perspective than just, here's what you should eat to lose weight kind of thing. And I say I kind of joke that nutrition is the cover story. It's the starting point, because people will come and they would like to lose weight and they say, I need to change my nutrition. And that's where we start. But we ultimately move into people's deeper stories and why they're at where they're at. And then we go on this really cool transformation journey together. So I love it.
It's what we call decorating the door, right? You have the door decorated for people to come through, and then you razzle and dazzle with the sharing your gifts and talents to help really transform lives, which is so powerful. Talking about transforming lives, one of the things in your bio, we talked about one question changed your life, but I know there was a lot of things that kind of build up for that, Jon. Could you share that with us?
Yeah. So I went through some trauma about a little over 10 years ago when I was living down in South Africa. So my wife and I spent about 3 years traveling around the world, kind of as globetrotting English teachers and a few other various odd jobs we picked up in some countries. And so I went through this traumatic experience, and if there's time, we can go into some of the details. But more, I want to say I was nearly beaten to death, and I wasn't really prepared for the fallout from that. That is, I don't know that I was all that emotionally healthy to begin with. My wife used to tease me and call me the Tin Man, so I really wasn't that in tune with my emotions. But then going through drama really just kind of opened a lot of sort of gaping wounds emotionally and mentally. And because of that, I turned to food as a way to kind of change the channel in my head to kind of cope with all of the fallout that comes from being traumatized. And in that, I gained a lot of weight. So in order to lose 100 pounds, I had to gain a lot of weight as well. And, sometimes I joke that, I've really lost more like 600 pounds, but I was a classic yo-yo dieter for a number of years. And so after many attempts to lose weight, I was really, I was quite frustrated with my body. I was really angry and kind of it felt like my body had betrayed me, because I used to be an athlete and now I'm struggling in this morbidly obese body that doesn't seem to want me to lose weight. And I was really fighting with it. And, I hired a couple of different coaches. It really didn't work very well because I didn't know the kind of help that I needed, and they didn't know either. And so it's not to knock them, but really I didn't know how to communicate the help that I needed. So I hired this coach, and it was kind of my last kick at hiring a coach. I thought, if this doesn't work, I'm just going to give up, basically, and just be obese. He didn't treat me the way I expected. He didn't talk down to me. He wasn't judgmental. He actually showed me what compassion looks like. And so there came a point in our working together, and this is the question. He said, Jonathan, if you make a list of all the things you love and value, how far down that list do I go before I see your name? That one kind of left me speechless, because it wasn't that I was near the bottom of the list. I wasn't on the list at all. So all of a sudden I have this moment of reckoning. I never thought about this, that I could actually even be on the list of things I love and value. And maybe you could say I was the proverbial set myself on fire to keep other people warm, stemming from this story or this belief that as I am, I'm not enough, and constantly trying to sort of overcompensate and give everything I have to other people because I kind of felt worthless. And so here he is, and there's a real power in a well-timed question that's asked at the right time in like a coaching journey. So that for me began this exploration of where do you even start when you don't know what self-love looks like or self-compassion looks like? So it really began on this journey here.
Could you explain to us a little bit about what you went through journey-wise? Because so many people feel that they're not good enough, they're not lovable, they can't do what others expect of them. Tell us a little bit about your journey and uncovering and then moving from it.
So I would say, because I'd previously been athletic, I probably like a lot of my confidence would have stemmed from sort of my physical prowess in a sense. And after going through that trauma and becoming obese, there was a real loss of a sense of identity. Who was I now? There was a real, almost like a dissociation. Like I felt like I was trapped in this fat body when I was still an athlete. And I had to go through almost like a grieving process where I put to rest this old identity that wasn't going to come back. And I think that's something we don't talk about often enough, particularly in Western culture. We often only connect grief to like death and the sort of finality, but there's times in life where there are things that we have to grieve and put behind us. And I had to come to this place where I was able to accept myself as I presently was without trying to deny my present condition if I was ever going to be able to change. So I had to acknowledge that I was no longer an athlete. I'm now obese. I was a binge eating food addict because that's sort of a product of the trauma. And it was because that coach showed me this grace and this compassion that allowed me to not feel such shame about where I was presently at. I guess you could say I did the best I could with the tools I had at that time, and the tools were incomplete. And so the binge eating, I like to all behavior makes sense. And I don't mean that it's helpful always, but at least we could understand why it was happening. And as I started to look through this lens of compassion and maybe even curiosity instead of like judgment and anger and frustration, that was where I was able to start creating change in my life. And so I like this idea that compassionate awareness is really the space where we create powerful change.
Jon, let me ask you, a lot of our behavior comes from seeing it in our situation around us or in our experience of maybe our parents when we were younger, or people who are closest to us. Did you have an experience with eating in a way that when it brings you comfort?
I would say yes, in a sense, because there was a period of time growing up, my dad had a business that failed and left us really in a difficult spot financially for a number of years, meaning that we didn't get a lot of, I guess you could say, fancier or good food to eat. It was pretty basic fare because we were living even below the poverty line for a period of time. So what that sort of fostered in a sense was when I was presented with any kind of indulgent or tasty food, I ate it like a dying man or a starving man, because it was like, I don't know when I'm ever going to see food like this again. I've got to eat as much as I possibly can, because that was just the situation that we were in. And so I think in a sense, and you could say I could kind of get away with it, so to speak, when I was younger, when I was a teenager, when I was a young adult, because I was athletic and I stayed very active. I lived on my rollerblades at university, but that pattern of eating stayed with me. And then of course, after going through the trauma, it just sort of blew it into like the stratosphere where this problem was all of a sudden now wide open.
And as I was doing research before our conversation today, I noticed that you mentioned on the website PTSD. Could you help people understand how we move to protecting ourselves with body, with weight from trauma like that?
Yeah. There is a really interesting element to that, in that, let's say, adding extra weight in terms of body fat subconsciously is also like kind of putting up a shield. You can't hurt me because I have this protective layer around me. PTSD, for those who don't know the acronyms, is post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's when something traumatic happens, there's some extremely powerful emotions connected to that. That incident is kind of burned into the brain, and a person can actually kind of become trapped in that moment in a sense. So every day, the incident could have happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but any kind of trigger can bring them right back to that very moment and that very feeling, because there's such a strong connection in the brain. And in that moment, the brain doesn't distinguish between that was a past incident 5 years ago versus my present reality. So it's thankfully we've come a very, very long way in terms of our understanding of it, but for many, many years it was not understood. And I might mention there's a really, really powerful book called The Body Keeps the Score. I would say it's quite a heavy read. The author is named Bessel van der Kolk. But if you ever want to understand what it's like for a traumatized brain, that book will help you to understand, and I think it'll give you much greater insight into people's behaviors. And so for me, I was a lot of flashbacks. So it was a lot of the trauma would reappear, the story would reappear, and some of it is connected to, if I knew this, I would have done that. So these attempts to rewrite the story in our head. But every time I would relive the story, it would also, in a sense, kind of re-aggravate the trauma and sort of re-aggravate the eating behaviors. So there came a point in my journey where I was I was very tired of being angry. So if you meet me, I'm an empath. I like to hug people. I have a really kind heart. But after being traumatized, I was a very angry person, and even had thoughts of wanting to carry out violent retribution. Now, part of my brain knew that this wasn't really who I was, and yet these thoughts not only came into my head, they actually had an appeal. And that was a real struggle for me as well. I don't want these thoughts here, yet there's this compelling, so I'm feeling a lot of guilt around that as well. But this is very common that we could say that hurt people in order to kind of take back something that was taken from them. Thankfully, I never acted out on any of these thoughts, but it was a real struggle having them in my head. And so I made the decision that I was going to forgive the men who tried to beat me to death. I never saw them again. I didn't go back to South Africa for the court case. But I made this decision that I was going to forgive them. Now, I would ask the question, how do you forgive people who would do this again without remorse? That was what I had to grapple with, because I suspect if they ever saw me again, unless they were very changed men, they would carry out the same behavior. So for me, I had to ask the question, what happened to them? So instead of in my mind building them up into being like these inhuman monsters, I had to kind of humanize them and say, what happened to them where they ended up at this place in life, where they thought this was an appropriate and maybe even desirable course of action. And so every time I would get angry, I would try to bring myself to this place of compassion and remember that these are human beings that are probably damaged human beings, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. And so I would start to counter that anger with compassion until eventually I could genuinely say I'd forgiven them.
That's so powerful what you just shared there, because we all have a story, and we don't necessarily, especially when we're a victim of a victimizer, really take the time to look at the victimizer's story and realize how they may have gotten there, especially even when it's our parents that sometimes are the victimizer, and it's hard to go back and look at that. In your forgiveness, how did that free you?
It meant that when I thought about the experience, when memories of it came back, when the anniversary of it would come around, that I was no longer filled with kind of this crippling rage. And, anger and rage, and I think vengeance, they're really like poison to the soul. They really, in the moment you feel maybe a sense of strength and power, but it's like draining you. And so to be free from that heaviness, sort of that blackness, that emotion that was poisoning me, it was incredibly liberating, and it was essential in my in my journey of recovery. It opened the door for me to move into the next stage of my recovery.
You shared earlier that the question about where your name showed up on the list was an eye opener, but in many ways, the experience of the beating and some of the eating and some of probably the experience of how you were treated around how you looked was also it had to be a wake-up call also, or a door opener for you to realize that you wanted to be different and there was something more. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, there was a part of me that didn't forget that I used to be an athlete, even though I had to sort of, put that identity to rest in a sense. But there was a part of me that just, even though I wanted to give up, couldn't give up on the fact that I felt like this wasn't going to be my destiny. I just hadn't found the way forward yet. And so that's kind of what caught me trapped in the yo-yo diet cycle itself, was I kept trying to figure out a way to lose weight. But the key was I was avoiding the one thing that I really needed to face up to, and that was the relationship with myself and the relationship I developed with my body. And so it was when my coach modeled for me the behavior that I didn't know what I was needing, and that was compassion. So being able to see my behavior without judgment, so I could go to him and, I face planted, or I ate an entire pizza sitting alone in my car in a parking lot, and he didn't abuse me over that. And I use that word because I was very verbally abusive to myself. And I would say, if I was ever to speak to another person the way that I used to speak to myself, I wouldn't have a friend in the world. And so I very often took how I felt about myself and I would project it onto other people and assume that is how they must feel about me when they see me. They must think I'm a fat loser. They must think I'm a hopeless case. Because the part of it that, I'm quite well educated. And so there was a part of it, I think I felt really frustrated, because I was like, how could I be so smart in one sense and so helpless in another sense? And so it made me feel very, very weak. And so when I was shown compassion and really that behavior was modeled for me, I started to learn what it meant to show myself compassion, and that actually became very empowering.
We attract into our lives the things that we need to to move forward on our journey. And I'm sure you wouldn't be the coach that you are, or even the person that you are right now without those experiences. One of the things that we share at Imagine Miracles is that we tend to experience or see things in our present that are triggers for us from some of the pain of the past. Was there some pain in the past that was very similar to this beating for you?
There was definitely a time where I felt socially isolated. So it's kind of interesting you asked that question, because when I was 9 years old, we moved from the city I lived in to a small town. And in a small town where everybody knows everybody, I was very much an outsider, and I came in at kind of an awkward age around that 10 years old. And so probably from 10 to 14 or 15, there was a 5-year stretch where it was really socially kind of difficult, because I didn't feel that sense of connection for people. So there's kind of this element of that in the experience, because when I was sort of fighting for my life and screaming for help, and nobody was coming to help me in that moment. It was like, here I am all alone again, kind of fighting. And so there's definitely an element of that. And then there's also the element of the eating piece. So it's really interesting to reflect on it and think about how some of these things that happen very early in sort of developmental years kind of reappear a little bit later in life. But I might put forward the question, and this is me almost thinking out loud, that some of these experiences in early childhood and then them being brought up again in adulthood was like my opportunity to actually move through them and move past them. And I could even say that I wouldn't remove these experiences from my past.
I have to agree with you 100% in the fact that, first of all, these experiences, in my belief, there's a reason for them to show up, and there is a gift in each and every one of them. We just have to be willing to find it. How are you who you are today as a coach because of those experiences?
I would say that I understand things that you can't read in a book. I now have an intimate and deeply emotional understanding of what it is like to struggle, what it is like to feel deeply ashamed, to feel like I'm trapped in a body that is betraying me. The struggle. So you could read a book about it. Someone could be like a very capable coach in one sense, but you really can't connect with people. You can't cultivate empathy until you understand the experience, because you've intimately lived some aspect of that. And so all of the struggles that I've went through have really shaped how I work with others. And I say my 2 core values are compassion and integrity. And compassion really leads the way for me. And I like to say that compassion is not a get out of jail free card. Compassion really walks the middle ground. So if I was to encounter a client engaging in a really unhelpful behavior, it wouldn't help them if I was to go to them and be like, "What are you doing, you dummy? You know better than that." That doesn't help them. On the same token, if I was to go to them and say, "Well, you had a hard day, and you know what, just write the rest of the day off." Well, that's not really helping them either. That's what we call enabling. And so compassion walks the middle of the road where there isn't judgment there, but we say, look, let's understand. Let's create the space where we can start to understand why this is happening. And if we can understand why it's happening, we can now create change around this behavior instead of repeating and reinforcing the behavior.
You said something that I want to ask you about before we move on to learn some of the differences that you've made in people's lives. You mentioned being an empath earlier, and you mentioned empathy just now. What I've seen in the world is so many get wrapped up into the title or the belief of I'm an empath, and they let that bring their vibration down. Being an empath to them is meeting someone else on their lower vibration. Could you speak to that?
That's a really, really interesting point. And I would say that's definitely something I used to struggle with, because as I mentioned, I was the proverbial set myself on fire to keep others warm. And so in order to be healthy as a coach, it also means that I have to establish healthy boundaries. And I recognize that it might seem like I would be doing someone a favor if I was like, bring me your problems, I'll solve them and hand them back to you. But in that process, it's very disempowering for the client I'm working with, and there's no opportunity for them to grow. And so it would actually be dishonoring them if I was to say, I'm going to solve all of your problems. And so in a sense, what I do is I create a healthy boundary between myself and the client where, and that's not so easy to do as an empath, because an empath, we can really take on, and I struggle with this a lot in my earlier years, really take on all the energy that people are putting out. And so I think it's very important to have this healthy boundary where I accept that it is not my responsibility to solve other people's problems for them. And so I say to my clients, I'm your tour guide, I'm not your Sherpa.
Awesome. That's a great way to put it for sure. Tell us about boundaries, because that's one thing that we haven't talked about on this podcast. And I think it's so important for people to realize having your own boundaries, but then also setting it for others. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah. For people who are empathic, setting boundaries can actually feel like you're being an unkind person. I think that's the struggle. But really, that's rooted in this sense of I'm not good enough as I am. Others will, they will treat us in a sense the way that we invite them to treat us. And that's not to say that everyone's going to treat us kindly if we have a deep sense of self-love for ourselves. But if we don't establish boundaries, people will trample all over our boundaries, and we will begin to feel resentful and angry and frustrated and used, and might show up in passive-aggressive behavior. But when we establish firm boundaries, the first time you do it, it can be a real challenge because people might not be used to that boundary being established, and they bump into it and they go, what just happened here? You just set a boundary. That's not the person I know. And you have to be willing to be a little bit uncomfortable in establishing boundaries and knowing there might be a little bit of friction in some of your relationships. But once those boundaries are established, now you're moving into a healthy relationship. And that's so, so, so important.
And I would venture to guess that you're going to share with us the healthiest relationship that you have to have is with yourself. Could you share some of the experiences that your clients have had as you've helped them be compassionate with themselves, but also develop that relationship with themselves?
Yeah. So I go back to one of the earlier things that I said, that compassionate awareness is the space for powerful change. I think that's really, really important. So in order for us to create change, we have to be able to bring into our conscious awareness the unhelpful behaviors we're engaging in. Now, if we have an unhealthy relationship with ourselves, when we do that, we're going to start to judge ourselves and create sort of these character judgments and this negative self-talk. But when we bring compassion into the picture and we start looking through that lens, and we look through the lens that all of these behaviors make sense, it's a bit of a simplification, but we can say they're an attempt to solve a problem. For example, binge eating was an attempt to solve a problem for me. And it worked in the short term, basically smothering everything I felt in food. But in the long term, it was really unhelpful. So I say to my clients, you can borrow some of my belief in you if you don't have that yet, And what I do is I say, it's cliche to use the phrase hold space, but I don't have a better term. Hold space for people to wrestle with their demons in the light and say, you know what? Let's talk about these struggles, and we're going to look at it through the lens of compassionate curiosity, and we're going to figure out why this is happening. And so as I model that behavior for them, they then begin, just as my coach did for me, now they begin to see, well, this is actually what it looks like. Because it might sound surprising, but many people don't really know how to truly show themselves compassion. We've been even confused, in a sense, by a lot of marketing messaging that suggests that enabling is the same thing as compassion. That, you've had a hard day, you should probably eat chocolate and treat yourself. Well, that's really, again, fostering an unhealthy relationship. And so as we become aware of these things, that's where we can start to create the real change within ourselves.
In that change, it sounds to me like it's an inside job, right? It's the change on the inside that helps the reactions actually that we have on the outside. How do people move from healing on the inside to then healing the outside?
Well, what's really interesting, and I love that you're putting it that way, because I say to people, like, if I take one step back, a lot of attempts to create change take an outside-in approach. So it's like, I'm going to force you to change. I'm going to put you in a straitjacket and, starve you or something like that. Well, that can never last, because the change has to first come within. As you start to change yourself, and as I started to change myself, my relationship with myself, it began to change every relationship I had with other people, because now I wasn't taking all of my feelings of inadequacy and projecting it onto others and then seeing it reflected back to me and then getting angry at them, because I was creating this entire story in my head. They must think this about me. And so when that went away and I could see myself with compassion, it introduced compassion into all my other relationships, including my marriage. I have a very good marriage, and I'm really grateful for it. I have a wonderful wife. All of a sudden, as we start to realize that all behavior makes sense and we start to use compassion on ourselves, we then begin to use compassion on other people as well. And in that, we enable them to start to create change as well, even kind of unintentionally. So compassion is this really powerful ripple effect that it starts on the inside, but it actually then begins to move into the circle of people that we're closest to as well.
And we model it for them so they have an opportunity to change. But just like you said, that we attract these people into our lives to mirror to us what we're feeling on the inside. When we start feeling compassion for ourselves, we attract those people that can share the compassion also. So that's so powerful.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, Jon, we're coming to the end of our time, and you've got so much to share with the people that are ready to move into that space, to honor themselves, to set their own boundaries, to have compassion for themselves. Could you share a piece of guidance with them?
I wish I had believed when I was younger that I wasn't broken. And so I would want to say that you're not broken. We are a lot more resilient than we really give ourselves credit for. And it's incredible how strong the human spirit actually is. We can endure tremendous hardship. It's not that we look for it, but we actually have that capacity. And when we recognize that, it actually can help us to be willing to do the difficult and the uncomfortable work. And on the other side of it, I can say 1,000 times over, I would do it again to get to the place where I'm at now. And so I would encourage people really just to trust in their inner strength and resilience. And also maybe just don't be afraid to tap into other people and ask for help. That's one of the greatest things we can ever do, is connect with another human being instead of trying to do this in isolation.
And we're not meant to be alone. We're truly community animals. And I want to share something that has been weaved in and out of this conversation with Jon, the importance of having a good coach or having a mentor to help you on the journey. Sometimes we're too close to actually see what's happening or what's going on, or maybe still relying on old beliefs or old patterns to try to make the change or make the transformation that we're looking for. And Jon's been an excellent example of the mindset of a coach and the mindset of someone that wants to walk with you on your journey, not pull you along it. So I want to thank you, Jon, for who you are as a coach.
Well, thank you. And thank you as well again for the work that you're doing. I think, for me, it's a privilege to come on and to be a guest here, but this is a wonderful work that you're doing as well, and a wonderful contribution you're making to the community.
Thank you so much. Could you share with us how people can get in touch with you?
By all means, you're very welcome to. If you wanted to learn more about sort of how I approach weight loss and creating genuine transformation, we can go to freedomnutritioncoach.com. That's my website. I'd also say, if you're on social media, you're very welcome to send me a friend request on Facebook. I'm quite open and willing to have and enjoy having conversations with people. And so I would say those are probably the two best places to find me.
I'll make that information and quite a bit more about how to get in touch with Jon on his show page. Just go to themiracleyou.com, look for Jon's episode. All that information will be available to you there. Jon, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to spend with us and to share your wisdom and to share your guidance.
Thank you.
On behalf of my wife and business partner, Mary, the entire team here at Imagine Miracles, we want to wish each and every one of you a miracle day.
You've completed this episode of The Miracle You, but we have plenty more to help you discover your own personal passion and purpose. Head over to themiracleyou.com for free resources to assist you on your journey, as well as register for our free webinar, Discover Your Miracle Life, 3 Mind Awakening Steps Toward Your Unique Purpose, or apply for a one-on-one Your Life, Your Way breakthrough session and discover your next best step on your journey. All available exclusively on our website. That's themiracleyou.com. We look forward to sharing more experiences of passion, purpose, and life by design next time, right here on The Miracle You.